What type of game do you imagine when you hear the term early 80s? Do they look like this? This? Or perhaps this? Now imagine seeing this show up in your local arcade.
Whoa, nice graphics!
2 screens, well-animated characters that are able to seamlessly zoom in and out of the screen to simulate moving up and backing away from the player character. Purely reactionary and skill-based gameplay, using clues from your opponent's face and body movements to try and dodge to the left or right, to try to avoid their oncoming attack and then counter with your own punch. This is PunchOut in its most purest form, for better or worse. One of Nintendo's earliest series, with the first arcade cabinet releasing back in 1983 in Japan and 84 in the States. A very important game in Nintendo's history that stands alongside games such as Donkey Kong and Mario Bros. That helped lead them to creating their video game empire in the late 80s with the Famicom and NES. Many critics praised it for its beautiful graphics for the time and its fun skill-based gameplay. The game was popular enough to receive a sequel a year later titled Super PunchOut, which was mostly more of the same, just with new opponents and a brand new duck move. There was also a 2-player PunchOut game for the Game & Watch that was certainly a Game & Watch game. And we can't forget the series' first and only spin-off, arm wrestling. Yay, arm wrestling, I like that one. It's clear how popular PunchOut was when it was first released. So much so that when Nintendo joined the console market in the mid-80s, PunchOut didn't take long to make its own jump to consoles as well. All of these earlier games in the franchise aren't the main focus of this video. I want to go more in depth and discuss the 3 main console releases in this franchise, as they all have a little more depth to them, but they are all too small individually to warrant their own separate reviews. So, here we go. Let's begin our underdog journey to be the best around with none other than the most famous game in the series, 1987's PunchOut featuring Mr. Dream. Well, that's what the game is called now. Back when it was first released, heavyweight champion Mike Tyson was the cover boy and final boss, but Nintendo's contract ended with him 3 years later, and we could only imagine why Nintendo didn't renew the contract. So, in future releases of the game, they replaced Mike Tyson with the fictional character Mr. Dream as the cover boy and final boss. This is the first game in the series to add a little character and plot to everything rather than just this. Instead of playing as this nameless, green-haired man from the early entries, you play as the biggest, or the smallest, underdog of all time, Little Mac. Seriously, this 17-year-old only weighs 107 pounds, and in the NES game is only 4 foot 8 inches, which is later changed to a more reasonable 5'7" in later games, but wow, this guy's a freaking hobbit. We don't know a ton about Little Mac other than what little backstory is provided in the manual. Here is where we learn that he grew up in the Bronx and that he wanted to prove that he was the best by competing in the World Video Boxing Association, or WVBA for short, and become the champ. Unfortunately for him, he was denied by almost every trainer he seeked out to help him achieve his goal, not due to how awful he is in Smash, but because of his small size, until he finally found one trainer that wasn't only willing to train him, but was a world champion in his own right. Meet Doc Lewis. He's going to be our coach throughout the entire game and is going to provide us with some great insight, such as join the Nintendo fan club today. Well, he also has some intense and varied training routines for us, so let's get started. Wait, the only training Little Mac does is long-distance running? And only running. We aren't totally sure why long-distance running is the only part of Doc Lewis's training regimen, but hey, if he's the champ, it must work. After Little Mac and Doc finish up all of their running, it's time for Little Mac to enter his first match, climb the ranks, and become a world champion. Little Mac does just that and eventually enters the dream match against either Mike Tyson or Mr. Dream in a battle to become the heavyweight world champion of the world. It's a simple plot, but effective enough to get you through the game and want to become a champ yourself. A lot of its more charming aspects shine through the mid-round dialogue that comes from your opponents and Doc Lewis. It really helps their personalities shine in ways that the older games couldn't possibly do. Each opponent is incredibly unique from the last in terms of not only fighting style, but also looks and personality. This helps them all stand out from the last, making them all incredibly memorable. They all somewhat subscribe to the Gruntilda method of villainy by annoying and insulting you. This just leads to you hating them more and more every time you fail, making your eventual victory all the sweeter. What do you actually do in PunchOut, though? Well, besides boxing, if that wasn't obvious enough. Well, like I described earlier, the gameplay is incredibly simple when you get down to it. You, as Little Mac, need to defeat each opponent that faces you by blocking, dodging, and punching your way to victory. Each opponent has different fighting styles and different weaknesses from the last that you need to take advantage of to gain victory. You need to punch your opponent to lower their HP. Once their HP is at 0, they will be knocked down. If they get back up before the ref counts to 10, the fight will continue. The same goes with you. If your HP is lowered to 0, you will fall and need to mash A and B to get back up. Fall 3 times in the same match and Mac won't stand up no matter how fast you mash. There are a few different methods to achieve victory. The most common and safe method is to get a TKO, meaning you knock down your opponent 3 times in one round. Each match is split into 3 rounds, by the way. Also, like I said earlier, if you knock down an opponent and they don't get up in 10 seconds, that match is yours. Don't count on it though, that rarely happens outside of incredibly specific circumstances. The last method occurs when you run out the clock and you're both still standing, in which case the winner is decided by the ref, which in my experience is almost always the opponent. Freaking cheaters. Pretty much just think of how traditional boxing handles winning and losing. I personally only try to go for TKOs as they are the only guaranteed win. Since this is a boxing match though, your opponent also has all 3 of these methods to beat you, so keep that in mind. Little Mac also has an endurance meter, represented by this heart icon. As long as you have more than 0 endurance, you can dodge and punch to your heart's content. But if you take damage or your opponent blocks a punch, then the meter will lower, and if it hits 0, Mac will get all tuckered out and you won't be able to punch or block until you dodge enough of their punches. And that's the overall basics of how matches play out in the game. You and your opponent try to outwit each other and knock each other out. As long as you use these tools effectively, you will be able to eventually defeat every boxer that stands in your way. And eventually isn't an exaggeration either, because this is one of the hardest games I've ever beaten. Many of the opponents past the minor circuit on your first playthrough will, and I cannot stress enough, will test you. Some tells are incredibly subtle, and others are just so fast that you need inhuman reflexes to somehow dodge. Most of them all have signature moves as well, such as Great Tiger's teleporting, Super Macho Man's Super Duper Turbo Deluxe Hurricane Spin Punch, and Bald Bull's complete bullcrap bull rush move that knocks you down in one hit if you either don't dodge it or hit him in the stomach at the exact correct frame. And we haven't even gotten to the worst part yet. As if the opponents weren't hard enough by themselves, you also only have 3 lives per circuit. Lose all 3 and you need to re-enter a password to try again from the beginning of the circuit. And sometimes, depending on different circumstances, you'll get sent back to your last opponent that you've already beaten. What the hell? This is by far the most dated aspect of this game that I just can't stand, so I personally just use save states at the start of every fight to keep myself from pulling my hair out, and actually give myself a chance to learn and study my opponent, rather than constantly fighting previous ones. Now that we have all of the basics down and what this game is all about, I just wanted to briefly talk about each circuit. The minor circuit is a great tutorial to get you started and help you learn all of the basics of the game. Glass Joe is a complete joke that anyone could beat after only at least 1 or 2 tries. Von Kaiser ain't that much harder. I honestly personally find him a little easier, as his head shaking is such an obvious tell that it's super easy to predict. Piston Honda ain't too bad either, and is a good test to make sure you have all of the basics down before entering the major circuit. The major circuit is tough on your first playthrough, mostly because you're not going to know what to do, but as soon as you figure out how to beat each opponent, the execution is very easy. Don Flamenco always blocks and counterattacks, so use that to your advantage. King Hippo may seem big, hard-hitting, and intimidating, with no obvious weakness at first, but if you follow Doc Lewis's advice to punch him in his mouth when it's open, it's super easy. Also, because he's super fat, he can't get up after you knock him down once, potentially making him one of the fastest fights in the game. Great Tiger is another opponent that seems pretty hard at first. His quick jab has a very subtle tell. At least it was subtle to me when I first played. His teleporting also catches many first-timers off guard, such as myself, but as soon as you learn how to deal with it, it's super easy. Bald Bull is a great ending to the major circuit, as this is when opponents will really start to challenge your reaction, and his weakness also isn't immediately obvious. I'd argue he's the first fight in the game that is still hard for returning players. Or at least is still hard for me. The World Circuit, though? God damn, everyone here wants Mac dead. Piston Honda and his Hurricane Punch, Soda Popinski and his incredibly fast uppercuts, Bald Bull returning with his complete bullcrap bull rush again. Don Flamenco coming at you with much faster speed and also not letting himself get infinitely taunted and countered. Mr. Sandman coming at you with the Dreamland Express. And last of all, Super Macho Man, and well, he's got everything. His signature move, the Super Macho Spin 3000 Ultra Alpha Omega Extreme Punch. And it's coming at you like... super fast, ton of health, total dick. It feels good when you finally muster the strength to take him down once and for all. For many players, the World Circuit is where the game truly begins. You don't only need to know how to defeat everyone, but you also need the skill and reflexes to execute on that strategy. And then, after finally defeating everyone, Little Mac is granted the title of World Circuit Champion and is granted the ability to participate in the Dream Fight. It's all come down to this. It's time to kick some ass. I never beat this fight. I first played this game on an otherwise pretty boring trip, and it was how I spent the majority of the week. I would dedicate entire play sessions to only one opponent at a time until I eventually beat the final boss, Super Macho Man. Okay, I was never able to beat Mike Dream, but to be fair, the Dream Fight wasn't even in the original Japanese release of the game, so I like to think of him as more of a super boss rather than the normal final boss fight. He's just too much for any sane person to handle. Literally every time he hits you in the first 90 seconds is an automatic knockdown. Super annoying. This game is definitely Nintendo hard, but I think that adds to its charm. It's very fun to have to learn and study each opponent thoroughly to win. I get a similar high beating many of the boxers in this game that I do when I beat a tough boss in Dark Souls, for example. If this game came out today, I'm sure IGN would call it the Dark Souls of boxing games. This is a great game that introduced me to one of Nintendo's weirder franchises and one that any Nintendo fan should at least give a shot. Now, moving on to the sequel, Super PunchOut. Not to be confused with Super PunchOut, this one is a sequel to PunchOut. Well, that Super PunchOut is a sequel to PunchOut. Easy to remember, right? I don't really like this game that much. I know that probably sounds super weird due to how much I just praised the NES game and how similar this game really is. There's a lot of little changes that just rub me the wrong way. First of all, who the heck is this guy? Is he Little Mac? Is he someone else? Is he related to Little Mac? Maybe he's a distant relative to the green-haired man, I don't know. I never really liked this guy that much. If you remember my Sonic Forces video, I mentioned I don't really like nameless, mostly silent heroes. Not that Little Mac is bursting with personality, but a little backstory and a name can make all of the difference. I don't mind that Little Mac isn't the star, but can we at least give this guy a name, please? And a little backstory? What does this guy want? Why is he fighting? Is he also shorter than 5 feet? We'll never know. Some US promotional material states that he is indeed Little Mac, but this is never mentioned in any Japanese material, and come on, these two look nothing alike. Another small change I don't like is that there is just no plot at all. You just fight each boxer. I know this isn't a super big deal, but these little things add up, you know? Here's another change I don't like. Rounds are removed and every fight is only one round. Lame. This way, no one in the game is able to show off their personality other than their fighting style. Having multiple rounds also helps the match feel much more like a boxing match and not just a single player fighting asymmetrical puzzle game. What genre is Punch-Out anyway? This also leads into the fact that I don't really like most of the new challengers. Gabby J is just a weird, creepy old man Glass Joe. Fair Hugger is alright actually. He's a much bigger character that uses his massive size that forces you to use the new duck move, making its console debut in this game. Piston Hurricane is just a fake Piston Honda from Cuba. Bob Charlie is a Bob Marley knockoff. Dragon Chan fucking kicks you. Masked Muscle is a spitting, cheating bastard. Aaron Ryan is quick, I guess. Heike Kagero hits you with his hair, which why does that hurt? Mad Clown is a creepy clown. Narcissus Prince is a weird, blonde, egotistical fuck that doesn't like to get his face hit. He's also just super creepy. I don't like looking at him. Hoi Corlo has a stick, and that's all you need to know about him. And Rick and Nick Bruiser are just the definition of totally boring, big, bald white dudes that are tough. Super boring cast, if you ask me. My biggest problem with a lot of these opponents is that they are fucking cheaters. Say what you want about the NES opponents, but at least they only punch you, Great Tiger aside. In this game, if your opponent isn't kicking you, then they are grabbing you and stealing your health, or hitting you with a freaking stick. Yes, this can be seen as the series moving forward and making this game more unique from other entries, but I just don't think this is the correct way to go about it. I think it's a bit too much. I've been pretty negative up to this point, so let me try to be a little more positive. I also don't like the music. Okay, I'm sorry, but the battle themes in this game, they're just not that great. They're not bad, but they aren't nearly as memorable or catchy as the one theme from the NES game. Okay, to be actually positive for a second, I appreciate that this entry made the direction you dodge actually important. In the NES game, I just clicked left the whole time pretty much, if I wasn't blocking. In Super Punch-Out, certain moves come at you from only the left, right, or both sides, forcing you to duck. I like this. It adds on top of the simple mechanics, making them ever so much more complex. I also like that you are naturally blocking your stomach while in a neutral position, and you block your face if you're holding up. It makes you a lot less of an underdog and more on par with your opponents, which is fun in its own right. Super Punch-Out isn't a bad game at all, and is a worthy successor to the NES game, but I just don't like a lot of the new elements and changes that were implemented into it. I'm not sure if these elements led to Punch-Out laying dormant for as long as it did before the Wii game. That's doubtful, honestly, but who really knows? Let's move on to our final game, the reboot of the entire series. Punch-Out for the Nintendo Wii, released in 2009. This game is a reboot in the sense that it retreads the story of the NES game where you play as Little Mac climbing the WVBA rankings to become the champ. The majority of this game's opponents from the main campaign come from the NES Punch-Out, with 2 returning from Super Punch-Out, with much better personality than that game, I might add, and 1 brand new opponent in the form of Disco Kid. I like him, he's wacky and full of personality. I don't feel that I need to retread the opponents, as all of them have very similar fighting styles from their inception. But this game does do an even better job showing off their personalities by allowing them all to speak during fights and just being more expressive than ever in general. Each fight also has little cutscenes showing off what the fighters do in their free time. It's only in these cutscenes that we learn that Von Kaiser has his own gym where the kids that he trains somehow still beat him, or that Super Macho Man is a completely egotistical superstar from Hollywood, and that King Hippo literally just spends all of his free time eating, and that's why he's so fat. I love these cutscenes, they're just so much fun. You can even trigger special events in the middle of fights, such as knocking off Don Flamenco's apparent hairpiece, which is just amazing. Or punching Soda Popinski's bottle before he has a chance to drink any soda, which just pisses him right off. This game is also just a lot more fair compared to previous entries in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, the game is still pretty hard once you get down to it, but a lot of the tells are just more fluid, I guess. Let me use an example. So you remember the Bull Rush that I've been complaining about this whole time, right? Well, in this game, right before Bald Bull is about to rush you, you can see steam blow out of his nose, so you know exactly when he's about to rush you. Pretty much every opponent is made a lot more fair, but still challenging in this game. Fair challenge, more cutscenes, more comedy, more expressiveness from the fighters. This is why I play Punch-Out outside of the gameplay. After making it to the championship match and punching Mr. Sandman in the face over, and over, and over, and over again, Little Mac is once again crowned champion of the world. But that isn't the end of this story. Oh no, it's just the beginning. Turns out, every opponent is pretty pissed off about losing to a 107-pound, 5-foot hobbit and want to take the belt back for themselves. Welcome to Title Defense, the hardest mode in any Punch-Out game, where you have to refight every opponent again, all with totally new and much more difficult fighting styles. This mode is grueling. Even Glass Joe is pretty tough now by introducing feints to his moveset. Yes, this mode does have some cheating in it, such as Glass Joe wearing a headgear and King Hippo taping a sewer lid to his belly, but those are all way more reasonable than a literal stick and kicking. Oh yeah, and Donkey Kong is also an opponent as well. I'll be honest, I never really finished Title Defense. My first time playing Punch-Out Wii was for this video, so after marathoning every other game in the series, once I got to Title Defense, I guess you could say I was pretty punched out.
Oh, you stink! I forgot to punch out.
But I think the first campaign alone makes for my favorite Punch-Out game. The personality, difficulty, and humor are all perfect. Doc Lewis even introduced actual strength training to his long-distance running regimen in this game. There's not much more to say. This is just Punch-Out perfected and has everything I would want from the series, with enough content to keep you busy much longer than any previous entries. It has all of the best elements of both of the previous games on top of its own positive additions, making it an incredibly fun game that any Nintendo fan should add to their collection. Punch-Out is such a weird and wondrous series that is so unique and different from any other video game I've played. Its simple but addicting and challenging gameplay is so much fun that even when I can't beat certain opponents, like Mike Tyson or Title Defense, I still find so much fun in the games. An awesome and totally weird series that is for sure not for everyone, but is definitely worth giving a shot if you have interest in it. This was a more interesting and challenging review to put together compared to my last two. As it turns out, reviewing an entire series can be pretty tough, go figure. It was an interesting experiment, and I would appreciate any and all feedback regarding the video. Thanks for watching.